crazy, but I didn't know he would.
How did it run after that, Cat?
It helped it. It didn't spin as much coming off the turn.
Welcome to another high-octane episode of Southern Dirt Motorsports.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Southern Dirt Motorsports. I'm Randall Davis. I'm here with Jeff Walker and Mike Luna, and we have a very, very special guest today, a legend with us, and we try to bring you all the legends that we can. We have with us today Mr. Rocky Estes, and he's here to tell us the story of his racing career. And I guess, Rocky, we'd like to know, first of all, how you got started in racing.
Well, Daddy raced for 30 years before I started, and he run all over the South. Run Cup, which was Grand National then, I think. Run a lot of sportsman races. Run the sprint cars, which was Skeeters back then. He drove everything that there was to drive and won in them. You know, he started in the 53 in the midget out at Broadway Speedway, and he told me that he kept going out there wanting to drive one. Nobody let him in one. So he went out there one night, and some guy finally let him in the worst one out there. And Daddy always watched them other guys, and he said they had handbrakes. Daddy said, I ain't touching the handbrake if I ever get in one then. So they let him in the worst one out there, and he said about the flag stand, he about broke a handbrake off.
Rocky, for some of those kids that might not know who your dad was, tell them who your dad was.
Daddy's name was Tootle Estes. He raced all over the South for years, won over 1,500 features, and he was just a phenomenal race car driver. And anybody that raced with him will agree with that. He ran in the Cup Series in 58, and he won one dirt race and finished 10th in the Southern 500 at Darlington. He run 4 to 5 nights a week for 15 years in the Skeeters. He run the Sportsman for years, and they run all the NASCAR race. He was state champion NASCAR 2 years. So he had a really successful career. But then 1982, on August 21st, at Bulls Gap Raceway, he won his last feature and had a heart attack right after the race and died.
And now, beside of that, can you think of one really memorable event? I know you saw your dad race a lot, but there's always something that really stands out. And what can you recall as one of the most outstanding events that he was involved in, or maybe a race that he won, or a crash that he was in? What really stands out in your mind sometimes that comes to you when you think about it?
Well, the one race that stands out in my mind is the year he died. I was racing at Atomic, he was racing Newport. He was winning, and I was winning. And I kept wanting him to come down there, they was running 2025s. And he said, I don't want to come down there. I said, you're winning down there and I'm winning up here. And I said, Daddy, I've been racing for a long time. And we've been on the racetrack together, but we've never raced together. And I said, I've got an opportunity to race with you, and I want you down there. So he come down there, and he went out qualified and set fast time. I went out qualified and set fast time, but put us on the front row. And he come down there to me before the race, and he said, listen, boy, pays $1,000 to win, $350 for second. Said, you better get your little button go on because I ain't giving you nothing. And I said, I don't want anything. I either want to beat you or I want to run second to you. And they dropped the green flag, and for 16 laps, I could lay my hand on his right front tire because he always told me they just need enough room to race. They don't need the whole racetrack. And we kind of run up on some lap traffic, and I moved one of them down into him, and it cut his right front tire down. And he come to me after race, he said, I couldn't do nothing with you. And that was my most memorable race with Daddy because of that. You know, there was a lot of races that, you know, I watched him and Curtis Turner put on a show at Lakewood Speedway one Sunday. And they Curtis showed up with a 64 Chevelle that was immaculate, beautiful race car. 50 laps in the race, it didn't have a straight piece on it. And the bumpers was sticking straight out, and him and Daddy come off at 4. There's a mile of dirt, and I looked down through there, and they was bent sideways, and I mean, they was racing hard. And Jimmy Mostella was announcer all over the place. He started habitat and everything. He was about to eat that cigar. And they come down that front straightaway, and when you went in one, you better be on the bottom, or you're going to end up in downtown Atlanta, because that's where the racetrack was. And Daddy had to let off because his right front tire had gone down because of one of Curtis's bumpers, and went in and cut the valve stem out of it. And I asked Daddy, I said, what was you going to do when you got the one? He said, I was going on in there. I don't know what Curtis was going to do. You know, and there's a lot of them, you know, that write the stories of Daddy that, you know, we was down in Jacksonville, Florida. I was about 6, 8 years old. My mom and brother was up in Indiana visiting family. And Daddy goes flipping out of the racetrack. And they had to go down and cut a tree out, get him out of there. They brought the car in, worked on it, fixed it. Went out and started featuring, he went flipping out the other end that time. Something broke on the car from the first track. So, you know, there's just a lot of things, you know, that happened when he was racing. Kind of hard to remember them all, or, you know, but it was, he wrecked the car at Atomic, one of Paul Hickman's car out of Chattanooga, and it broke every weld on the car. You know, so he wrecked it one time at Smoky Mountain. Guy blew an engine in front of him, and it cracked the wall, broke both heads on the motor. You know, and so there's a lot of bad wrecks, but there's a lot of wins in there.
How many years did your dad actually race, Rocky?
I think he was in his 31st, 32nd year when he passed.
And how old was he when he passed?
He was 52.
Well, he did have a long racing career to be that young.
Yeah, he started in 53, so, you know, and he run a lot of races. I mean, like I say, he ran Greenwood, South Carolina on Thursday nights, and they moved around a lot on Friday and Saturday nights, but mostly it was Anderson, South Carolina on Friday night, and Tacoma, Banks County, Georgia on Saturday night, and Cummins, Georgia on Sunday night. Sometimes Dallas, Georgia on Sunday afternoon. And then every now and then, 2 or 3 times a year, they'd come over here and race at 411 and Nashway on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. So they done a lot of racing. Then he run Savannah and Jacksonville in the wintertime.
When he first started racing, what type car was he driving then?
He was driving the midgets back then, and then he moved into the Skeeters, which is the supermoto, or the sprint cars now. So, and he drove for a guy out of Athens, Georgia, Jabbo Bradbury, and he ran against Bud Lunsford, Buck Simmons, Doug Hennemer, all them guys. They were kind of like the World Outlaws now. They traveled around together all the time. They run the Peach Bowl, you know, on Sunday night sometimes. And at Cummins, Junior Samples and his family sat on the front row every Sunday night.
It had to be something awesome to watch your dad compete with all of those legends of racing. All of those guys became legends.
Yeah.
And they were the best of the best at the time, so he had to be one of the best of the best to compete on that level.
I brought that paper where he was Curtis Turner, Bud Moore, little Bud Moore, you know, and Daddy's the only 3 that's mentioned in the article, you know, that's going to be there to race. And he raced at Jeffco Speedway with them, Lakewood, down in Louisiana. They run in Atlanta. He went to Daytona. Like I say, run at Darlington. He was running second at one time at Darlington. I remember when I was 5 years old, I rode to Trenton, New Jersey, sitting on an overnight bag through the day and laying on Mom and Dad's lap at night, sleeping. He blew 9 right front tires up there racing that day.
Did he have a favorite racetrack that you knew about, or did he just?
Nah, not that I knew about.
The one he was on at the time was
Right.
his favorite then, I
Yeah,
guess.
we was at Newport one night, and he went out and hot lap, and the car was pushing a little bit. And, you know, like me, knowing it all, I said something to him about it, and I said, "You want to change anything on the car?" He said, "Nah." He said, "I'll just adapt." And went out and won the race.
Yeah.
You know. But up there another night, and him and LD was racing hard. And Daddy was on the bottom. And all of a sudden, Daddy just let LD go. Then he run him back down, got outside of him, passed him, won the race. I asked Dad, I said, what happened? He said, I ran out of brakes. He said, I had to get outside of him so it could slow the car down. You know.
LD had to be confused about along there too, as what was happening to him.
Yeah, well, I know when we went to Smoky Mountain the first time when he was going to start driving with Woody in the NASCAR, we went down and LD was winning all the races. And asked, when we was going home, I asked Dad, I said, can you beat him? I said, yeah, I can beat him. Went down the second race and beat him. You know.
Well,
LD was LD Auditor.
Right, I knew that.
Yeah, Newport, yeah.
maybe some folks didn't.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, LD won, what, 2 or 3 championships?
oh, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he was.
LD was a good driver.
Anytime you mention racing, LD was mentioned in it
Yeah,
back in the day.
LD's a good guy too. I raced with LD.
Is he still around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's still up in Newport. So,
Well, when about how old was your dad when you started racing?
probably about 40.
And how many years did you race at the same time that he was racing?
Probably, let's see, probably about 15. I didn't keep up with dates too well. As long as I was getting the race, I was happy.
That's a sign of a real racer too.
Had you just always known that you wanted to race? I mean, like I've heard Kyle Petty talk about Richard Petty, and I forget now how old he said he was before he didn't realize that every kid's dad wasn't a race car driver. So
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was a kid growing up, everybody, all my friends, their dad would get up and go to work every morning, and we didn't. And I thought that's the way you're supposed to live.
It was.
And, so, but, you know, we'd leave on Thursday and we wouldn't get home until early Monday morning. And I just, you know, I thought that's the way everybody lived.
Yeah.
But it was a good life. You know, there, for 2 years, when he was racing at Newport and Smoky Mountain, we lived on the lake all week. Then we'd go to the races on Friday night, come back to the lake. Then we'd go to Smoky Mountain on Saturday night. We'd go home, gear up, go back to the lake, you know. And,
Well, did you guys build your own equipment mostly, or did you have different ones doing engines and chassis?
Daddy always drove for somebody else. He never drove owned a race car. And I didn't either until I got my boys racing. And that's for my first ownership part. And it wasn't that much fun.
It's always more fun than somebody else's.
when you mentioned your dad racing with Bud Lunsford and Doug Kinnemer and Leon Sales, all those guys, that speaks volumes. I know, and you talked about, you mentioned with Curtis Turner and all those guys back then. That had to be a real exciting time to be around racing.
Oh, yeah, it was. You know, Darrell Waltrip, he raced with him. He's a super nice guy. You know, and Allison's, he run them. Red Farmer, he raced with Red. Bob Burcham.
Hadn't heard that name in a while either.
Yeah, he raced with him. Bob was a super nice guy. And he even talked to me. So, the thing about it is, when we was around all them guys, my job was to listen and not talk. So I listened a lot.
That was hard, that was hard to do, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where was your dad originally born, Wolfie?
I'm sorry?
Where was he born? Where was Tuggle born?
He was born in Knoxville. So, yeah, he lived there all his life except in '58 when we moved to Greenville, South Carolina. So when he was running Cup car.
But I know you said earlier, you was talking about he got with a guy in Georgia. That's where they did a lot of racing.
Yeah.
Jabbo.
Jabbo Bradbury, yeah.
Uh-huh. How did they get hooked up?
I don't really know. I don't know how they got hooked up. But the thing about Jabbo was, when him and Daddy raced together for about 5 years, and that's a long time driving for one person. But they finally went separate ways. And Jabbo come over to the house one weekend, and Daddy was racing down Smoky Mountain. Him and Jabbo and his wife Evelyn come to the house and stayed with us that weekend. And Daddy asked Jabbo if he wanted to ride the racetrack with him. Jabbo said, no, I'm gonna let Rocky carry me down there. I've carried him enough. Because we used to stay at his house all the time in the summer, me and my brother. And so I took him down there and we went to eat after the races. And he asked me if I wanted to come down and help him in his tire business. And he'd build me a race car. And I said, yes. And they left there and went up to Cherokee, North Carolina, spent the night. And he got up the next morning and had a heart attack and died.
Oh, my goodness.
Was there any one guy that was sort of a rival to your dad that he just rather beat than anybody else out there?
Bud Lunsford. Bud Lunsford is a smart, good race car driver. And him and Daddy raced good and clean for years. And one of them was going to win. It was always Daddy and Bud win, Buck and Kennemer run third and fourth back then. Buck was just a kid. But, I mean, they had some good races. And Bud probably beat Daddy as much as Daddy beat Bud. But I remember they'd get on the front straightaway and they'd go to pointing. And they'd argue and point. So one night they was down there and they was arguing and pointing. And I asked Daddy, Bud pulled out something and just shook his head and walked back to his car. And I asked Daddy, I said, what are y'all arguing about? The directions, which was northwest, south. Well, Bud brought a compass. And Daddy was right. So,
I kind of grew up idolizing all those guys.
Yeah.
They used to run that tri-racing circuit, West Atlanta, Dixie and Rome.
Yeah.
And it was Bud Lunsford and Kennemer and Charlie Mincy
Yeah.
and all those guys. And even Lakewood was still around at that time, like what you talked about. That old
I mean,
racetrack.
all them guys traveled together back in the day, in
Yeah.
the Skeeter.
Yeah.
And they put on some good races.
Racing was actually colorful back then. It was,
Oh, wow.
it was a
Very.
carnival atmosphere. Just being there was an accomplishment. You felt good just being around those guys
Yeah.
back in that day.
The stands would be full, and it was good racing.
Each one of them brought their own show with them. They were all showmen back then.
Yeah. Oh, and Harold Fryer was another Daddy liked to beat.
Yeah.
Him and Harold, they got along good. And when Harold got killed, it about killed Daddy. But, he liked to beat Harold. So.
Well,
The difference then and now, the guys that got the rides in the race cars it was because they was the best drivers, like your daddy, never owned his car. See, that hardly happens anymore. What they want is the people that brings the most money to the team. Now the best drivers sometimes are in the pits watching.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, and, it's strictly my opinion, back when Daddy was racing, I was racing, it was 78% driver, 20-30% car. Now then, I think it's 70-80% car and 20-30% driver because, you gotta have the right shocks, right tires. I never did drive 4-bar cars, so I don't know about them, but, them cars that I drove were hard to drive.
Most of them guys are winning. They've got an engineer. Actually, they got a tire guy on pretty much every team and an engineer.
Like what you were just talking about, like that progression where your dad started in midgets and then they ran the old flatheads and then up to the Skeeters. And then when they went to the late models, like we know a little bit about now,
Right.
Of course they've evolved from what they were, but this was a hotbed for the places to race. Like you had Atomic and Tazewell and Bull's Gap and Smoky Mountain. And I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And I mean, these guys, it was a torrid time, wasn't it? There was a lot of good racing going on then.
Yeah, you had to bring your big boy pants.
Yeah, and then like you was talking about, all those guys from Georgia, like Kennemer and Lunsford and all them, they would come to Atomic
Oh, yeah.
and all these places and race because like Newport, I think that was the first NDRA races in Newport, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this has always been, East Tennessee's been all the talent and stuff, all the racetracks are so strong,
Right. Yeah. Them guys out of Georgia and Chattanooga down in there?
Yeah.
They good racers.
Oh, yeah.
They good racers.
Yeah.
So,
Rocky, do you, I've heard different stories about it. Do you know how and where Harold Fryer got killed at?
Harold Fire got killed in Gaston, Alabama. Drive shaft come out of a car and come in and hit him in the head.
That's a story I had heard. I had heard some other stories about it, and I got to know Harold pretty decently too.
Yeah.
Throughout life.
He was a
Back in the day.
character.
He was about your size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause Daddy was down in New Orleans working at that time. I called Daddy and told him, man, it really bothered Daddy.
Then Freddie became a pretty prominent racer in the day too.
Well, he was crew chief too, wasn't he?
Yes.
I thought he was.
That place that you're talking about over at Gadsden, I saw that clipping where your dad won all those races in a row. Back at that time, Gadsden was a high-speed dirt racetrack, 140 miles an hour.
Yes.
You know, Glencoe, yeah.
Yeah, Green Valley is what they
Yeah,
ended up
Green
calling
Valley,
it.
that's right.
Yeah, they said you couldn't get whatever they put on the racetrack, you couldn't get off the cars.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't wash off.
Yeah.
That's the kind of racetrack you can take home with you and keep.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, Freddie, I ran into him when they put Daddy in the Georgia Racing Hall of Fame. And, golly, he latched on to me. I mean, you couldn't ask for nobody but nicer than me and Freddie Fryer was. He's super nice guy.
Hall of Fames is he inducted into?
3. He's in East Tennessee, which is down in Smoky Mountain. He's in the National Dirt Racing Hall of Fame out of Florence, Kentucky, and Georgia Racing Hall of Fame.
Man, those are huge honors. I mean, the Dirt Racing Hall of Fame and the Georgia Racing, they're all great honors, but how was it? Did you accept for him
Yeah, all 3 of them.
at Florence? All 3 of them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Buck, they inducted Buck and Daddy and Leon Sales in Georgia the same year. I forget who else was in there, but I remember Daddy and Buck and Leon Sales went in that year. And then we were at the National Dirt Racing Hall of Fame. Mark Richards and who else? I can't remember who else they put in that same year. There they did Daddy. But I remember Earl Boss walked by me, and he's one of the own Deltor at the time.
Right.
He walked by me and grabbed my hair. He said, "Man, I'd like to have a head full of hair like that." Yeah, but and then you know, they put him in the East Tennessee Racing Hall of Fame the year after he died. So he didn't have to, you know, wait the time limit or whatever it was
Right.
they were doing.
Was there anything that you ever heard your dad talk about that he would have liked to have done in racing that he didn't get to do? 'Cause from everything we're hearing here, he accomplished about everything he set down to do. Usually there's something happens along the line that eludes you and you just want to do it for whatever reason. Was there anything like that in his life that you know about?
Not that I ever heard him say. I mean, you know, he just enjoyed life. I mean, he raised me off of racing. You know, I was about 16 years old before we ever got a job. So, you know,
What kind of job did
selling cars. And he wouldn't work every day, but they wanted to fire him. He said, no, he said, he sells more cars when he's here than y'all sell all week.
he didn't have part-time was full-time for him.
Yeah. So, but he knew everybody. And, you know, he could talk to anybody. So, you know, he was a good guy.
That means a lot, just going through life,
Yeah.
knowing a lot of people,
Right.
getting along with people.
Yeah.
So how did you get your start?
Well, you know, I wanted to race since I can remember. I was 6 or 8 years old. And I'd ask Daddy millions of questions, and they got on his nerves most of the time. And so when I started, I mean, I was in high school, and everybody else would be going to the football games and the parties and the dances, and I was in the garage. You know, I worked on race cars, the modified. They'd race at Knoxville Race on Friday nights, and then 411 on Saturday nights, and asphalt to dirt. So I'd go over on the garage early Saturday morning and change gears and tires and everything on both cars, get them ready to go Saturday night. And, you know, I was at the racetrack on Friday and Saturday night. And so, you know, I just kept on and on, like Daddy said, aggravating everybody till they let me in. And I remember Joe Bibbins, he had a 6-cylinder that he raced down Smoky Mountain in the 6-cylinder division. And I was working with him up at Ashway Speedway, and I was about 14, 15 years old. And I kept on him about wanting to drive that race car. And he finally said, okay, he said, we'll take it up Ashway when we open it, and you can drive it. And I said, okay. So we get up there, and there was a jalopy division. I don't know if y'all remember that.
Oh, we all remember those.
That's the division is in. So we go up there and they drop a green flag. And I swear to this day, I was the fastest car on the racetrack. And about 3 or 4 laps, the leaders come up to lap me. And then one of them got me by the bumper and pushed me down in there where they let off. Well, after that, I kept turning around looking out the back car because it didn't have a mirror. Or didn't know how to use it, I don't know which one it was. And they had a caution and I saw Daddy on there pointing. I pulled over. He said, if I see that head turn around one more time, you'll never sit in another race car. And, but I made sure I got out of their way because I didn't want no more of that going down there where they got.
Well, when you started, was your dad all for you racing?
Oh, no, he hated it.
I know that happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, they had to sign for me. And Mama signed, Daddy, he wasn't, I never talked him into it.
It's a lot.
He never did like it, to be honest with you.
It's a lot of difference in being in the car and watching your son or
Yeah.
even daughter this day and
I
time.
know that for a fact because I got my son in it, and my stepson, and I was a nervous wreck. It was a lot worse than watching me racing.
Well, it's nice when you can have 3 generations come along and race and be successful at it.
Yeah. I mean, we've been very fortunate. Like I say, met a lot of good people. Had a lot of fun. Wouldn't trade it for nothing. So there's a lot of good people at the racetrack.
It teaches you a lot about life.
It does. It does.
And you make lifelong friends that way too.
Yeah, you do.
Well, Rocky, I've enjoyed this. Jeff and Mike, we've all enjoyed this today. And we'd like to, I know there's still more stories to be told. We got to have you back.
I'll be glad to come
We can't-
back. I've
we can't
enjoyed
let
it.
this
Appreciate
finish
y'all.
on this. But for this episode, we'll wrap it up here. Want to thank the Northfield Vineyard for letting us use their facilities today. And you guys out there have any events, any weddings, any parties, anything of that sort, get in touch with them and give them a shot at hosting the thing for you. I think you'll be surprised with what you see. And thanks to them again. Thanks to everybody. Please subscribe to this and like us on YouTube. Subscribing to us helps keep us alive, so please do that. And thank you all.
All right, thank you all.